want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. My name is Fred Litwin.
Noted author Fred Litwin. And of course, Fred is also the author of I Was a Teenage JFK Conspiracy Freak, On the Trail of Delusion, and Oliver Stone's Film Flam, The Demagogue of Dealey Plaza.
Fred Litwin is here. He's a longtime author and certainly watcher of politics.
Joining us, Fred Litwin. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to On the Trail of Delusion. My name is Fred Litwin, and you're about to see the first show of an ongoing series on the JFK assassination, where we try to separate reality from fantasy and actually give you a show on the internet that actually contains some substance, something a bit different from your typical conspiracy fare. So I'm going to try to, every week, bring on guests and panel discussions that will talk about topics that you don't normally hear on your typical Facebook page on the JFK assassination or on YouTube. We're actually going to try to keep this somewhat based on reality with real data, real documents, and people who are experts in their field. So tonight I am really proud to have Robert Reynolds here. Robert Reynolds is an expert on the files, the JFK assassination records and files. And right now, Robert lives in Taiwan, which is one of my favorite places. I've been there like 30 or 40 times. I love Taiwan. But Robert teaches in Taiwan right now at the National Chinan University. He's in the Department of Foreign Languages and Literature. Clearly, you speak Mandarin. Maybe you speak more than Mandarin. You've been living in Taiwan, I think, for over 20 years now, right?
Oh, yeah. It's been a while.
So quite some time. So you've got quite a resume of understanding Chinese literature, Chinese. Obviously, you know Taiwan and the region. And I lived in Asia for 5.5 years, so it's one of my favorite places. So it's a delight to have you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so... anyways, why don't we start off, and why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you got interested in the JFK assassination?
Okay, it's odd, but a lot of this stuff is, here I am in Taiwan for actually over 30 years, and never expected that. But going back to how I got interested in the JFK assassination record collection. This sort of goes back to something that I was doing in the early 2000s, when I had noticed that, my first interest was modern Chinese history. And modern Chinese history has a big problem, which is that a lot of the documents are not available. They're stuffed in some archive, or they're still classified. Classified by the PRC government, classified by the ROC government, which is Taiwan, classified by the American government. So you can't get this stuff until it started coming out. And this was in the 1990s, I think, that it started coming out. And so I noticed this, and I was looking at that, and I discovered that there was material on American history that was recently coming out. And I think the first thing along that line that I read was the Rosenberg file by Ronald Radish, where he had gotten a hold of, they had finally released the Venona decryptions, and that there's some very interesting material in there that's related to kind of China-related stuff as well. But anyway.
I should tell you that I'm friends with Ron Radosh.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's a great book.
Yeah, he's
He
a
did
great guy.
another.
He lives in the Maryland area, and whenever I go down there, I have dinner with him, and he's got a ton of great stories.
Oh man, he's a great writer. He wrote a book called Red Star Over Hollywood, which I loved.
Yeah,
So this is the kind of thing that got me into this thing, and I was reading a lot of this stuff. And then in 2017, they released a bunch of material in the JFK assassination records collection. And so I said, I got to read that. There's got to be something interesting in there. And I couldn't make head or tail of it from the newspaper accounts. And so I said, well, there's something wrong here. There's something confusing here. And so I know what I'll do. I'll just write a little Perl script and download all the documents, and thereby jump down the rabbit hole, and have been falling ever since.
right.
I think I've just about reached the point where I fall into the pool of tears shed by the giant Alice and swimming around in that. I started writing little notes on my blog about some of the stuff that I was finding. The blog was originally for my students at GNAN, and I talked about literature, translation, things like that. And they couldn't make head or tail of it. So I said, well, this is not good. And I set up a separate blog for the stuff I was writing about the JFK files. And so the blog is still going. It's been about 6 years now. And it's called the jfkarc.info. And that's me. That's where my primary writing is. And I've also published a couple of articles on the records, on the collection, at Max Holland's website called Washington Decoded. So that's my only claim to fame. But
you're
it's cool.
newbie.
I'm number one. I'm
Right.
show number one. I got bragging rights.
Yeah, well, we wanted to start off with the best, but
Ha.
but you're a newbie. I mean, I got into this in 1975.
Well,
It's been a long, long time.
yeah, I'm very new. And I'm rather odd in most of the people who are interested in this. I'm rather odd in that I'm not really an assassination guy per se. That is to say, I'm interested in the collection, in the records, and
Right.
in the archival aspects of it. The main thing I've been doing is writing about is some of the issues that are involved in classifying and declassifying these kind of documents. And so paid a lot of attention to what's withheld and what's not withheld, what's redacted, what's not redacted, when it's released, how it's released, and things like that. And so it's, I'm not sure how interested JFK aficionados would be in some of this stuff, but I think that it's a lot of it is the documentary basis for people who want to learn more about the JFK assassination, and that should be helpful.
Well, whenever I have an issue, I go to you for answers, and you've been very, very helpful. I mean, have you also read a lot of the books, though, about the assassin, a lot of the conspiracy literature?
My main claim to fame in this is that I actually read all of Bugliosi's book, the whole thing, including the 1,000-page supplements on the CD. I actually
Right.
sat down and read the whole thing. It's quite fascinating.
I mean, when I read Bugliosi's book, the problem I had was like, how do I hold it? It's so big and heavy. I mean, I pulled a muscle reading it because it's just I couldn't get comfortable. It was so huge and so heavy.
Oh no, it's no problem. Just don't drop it on your foot, though.
So, well,
Um,
that was really an important book. I mean, I waited for Billy Ozie's book for many many years because it was supposed to come out in like 2000, and then he got delayed because of all the documents coming out.
right,
Um, I mean, I think what's interesting with talking to you is, I mean, everybody is talking about the documents, and
right.
you see, Jefferson Morley has a blog, and it's always talking about the documents redacted, they're secret, we don't know, and I think there's sort of a smokescreen that's sort of presented to the public that there's this massive amount of information that's completely secret, and when these documents are released, we'll find out the truth. Redaction and withholding in the JFK collection. I'll go to your first slide.
Okay, so when we talk about the documents all come to us courtesy of a law. And the law is called the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, aka the JFK Act, the ARCA, or Public Law 102526. Okay, so it's a collection of documents, and the collection is held by the National Archives and Record Administration, or I'm not sure how to pronounce the acronym. I call it NARA, but that I'm a Midwesterner.
That's
Is
what I
it
use.
NARA? NARA?
I use NARA.
NARA, okay. And the documents were assembled and reviewed for release by a special board created by the JFK Act called the ARRB. And the ARRB was empowered to demand from all federal offices and agencies any and every document that they had relating to the JFK Act, the JFK assassination. They also were required, the agencies were required to produce descriptions of the documents. And so we'll get to that in a minute. So the JFK Act starts off with a really resounding call for complete release of everything that's in there. But if you look carefully at it, you'll see that in fact they had restrictions. And there are three types of restrictions on material that could be released or could not be released in the JFK collection. Now, the main chunk of documents that are not available for public inspection are what are called Section 11 records. And this is basically everything from tax records. The US tax code, Section 6103, restricts you from making this information public. And there's a recent case where the guy that released Donald Trump's income tax form, and as well as a bunch of other people's, was sentenced to jail for 5 years. So you can't do that. And the JFK Act did not suspend that law. So no tax information can be released. Section 10 is a little bit tricky. It's various court-related documents, but this section actually did not release those documents because they can't. The Congress can't make laws telling the courts what to do, right? That's basically the American system. Instead, what this section did was it empowered the ARRB to request legal documents that were either sealed by the court, which is one set, or they were grand jury records. And so some of those were, this was not used very much, okay? But a couple of them were used. In particular, some of the records relating to Carlos Marcello and the wiretaps that the FBI had on him, those were released through this section, okay? And then the final thing is what are called Section 5 records. Section 5 records is basically everything in the collection except for those 11 and 10 records. And Section 5 records are required by the law to be made public, with only one exception, which is that the agencies who hold the records can request the President of the United States to postpone release of information in the records if it meets certain criteria, i.e., it can cause harm to the United States defense, diplomatic, law enforcement, or national security or military functions.
Right.
Okay, and so that's the thing. And so, what do we have left here? I'll show you at the end of this. Okay, but those are the things that can be withheld, and all of them are to some extent being withheld at this point. Right. So when they're withheld, how are they withheld? There are three ways that you can handle this kind of record. Number one is the one that I call withheld, which means you get to see the metadata. How many pages? Who did it belong to? What is the title? Who sent it? What kind of document is it? But you don't get to see any of the text. Okay, so that's withheld. You don't see any words from it at all. Then there's a thing called redacted. What is redacted? It means that they put a box, a blank box, on the reproductions of the record that are made available by NARA, so that there are little bits of the text that you can't see. Sometimes it's big bits, sometimes it's little bits. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the final and most natural state of text is that you can read the whole thing, right? So those are the three things that you got. Now you can see where some of the problems are going to come in. But before I talk about that, I just want to introduce the collection, because I think that people are often confused by this, okay? So what's in the collection? Number one, it has artifacts. It's very odd for NARA to have an archival collection that includes bullets and guns, but it does. Those are, in fact, primary evidence in the JFK assassination. So the bullet that they found on the stretcher, the bullet fragments that they found in the limousine windshield, the gun that Oswald shot Officer Tippit with, all of these things, and then the gun that Ruby shot Oswald with, all of these things are in the JFK collection. Then it also has audiovisual materials, and this includes two key things. Number one, it includes the Zapruder film. And number two, it includes the Dallas police radio recordings, right? So that they were recording the police broadcast during the parade through Dallas. And these things actually supposedly recorded some of the gunshots, though no one can hear them. Right? So those audiovisual materials are also in there. But the main thing the collection has are textual records. And that's documents of every kind and variety, and includes some very exotic things like aperture cards, which are little pieces of microfilm that are cut out and taped to an index card, so that you can take the card and shove it into a machine and look at individual pages of microfilm. These are very tiny things, but it's still text. Having this vast pile of documents, it's not very convenient. It's a huge amount of documents they have. This is one of the biggest archival collections at NARA. So when you have this kind of collection, you want to do what's called document indexing. But in fact, there are two ways that this was done for the JFK collection. Number one is records that are really indexed. Index means what? It means that they have a database that includes a bunch of information about each document. And this information was collected using what's called a reader information form, or a RIF sheet. This was created by NARA, and they gave all the agencies software to fill out these forms. And the agencies were stuck with filling out the forms. And this is one reason that it took years to process all this stuff, because it's an incredibly demanding process. They want in theory, every document should have one of these. And then they took all of the stuff that they provided, the agencies provided, on floppy disks, and it turns out it's five and a quarter floppy disks. And they stuck it in their computer and they uploaded it to an electronic database, which was made available online, I think in like 1995 or something like that. There's no longer an online database, but instead they have Excel files, which are actually much better. And you can go to NARA and get the entire list. How many of these index records are there? There are 320,000 of them. And that's actually a problem that I'll talk about in a second. But this is only one set of records. This is not the complete collection. Okay? There are also unindexed records, which primarily come from two places. Number one, they come from the Warren Commission, which the JFK Act mostly exempted from filling out these forms. And they also come from the ARRB records, which is a big chunk of stuff. Again, it's, dozens and dozens of boxes. And the ARRB, when they went out of existence, there's no one left to fill out the forms. NARA is not going to fill out the forms because they don't do that. Okay. So instead, what they did is NARA compiled what are called finding aids. And these are lists of folders and boxes and what's in there and sort of a general overview of the thing. This is the normal archival system. And the other one, the JFK database thing, is very exotic and very unusual, quite experimental in this case. And in its final report, the ARRB told Congress, don't do that again. Don't make us do that again, because it just delays things and it's really not that helpful. Now, it is helpful. However, it is just a gigantic hassle for everyone involved. Okay, so let's talk about the JFK database that has the 320,000 records in it. This is all of the metadata, and these are what I call index records. You could call them rift records or whatever you want. Each of these records has a unique key, which is about 13 digits long. They arrange the records by source, which is, this is the first three digits in the RIF number. So for example, 104 is the prefix for CIA records. 124 is the prefix for FBI records. And then you have another string, a 5-digit string, which is the number of the disk that they filled out. And then you have another 5-digit string, which is the number of the document that they input onto the floppy disks that NARA gave them. And so that's what those numbers are. The database is available as Excel files. If you want to jump down the rabbit hole, just download them and you can start having fun. Now, there's two very important things to remember about the JFK database. Number one is that not every document that has an RIF sheet has that data in the database. In other words, some of it was omitted. Why was it omitted? Because if you've ever used 5¼ floppy disks, you know that if you sneeze on them, they're no longer readable. So it's very easy for them to get scrongled, which is a technical term meaning, they're screwed and you can't read them. You put it in the floppy disk and it goes ka-chunk, 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 and for like 5 minutes, and then you know that you're screwed. So that happened to a bunch of these things. There are other cases where are more mysterious. I think there's one set of records from the Investigative Reports Repository, which is Army intelligence. And there are like 5,000 of these things that are not in the JFK database. Why? I believe the story is that the Army told NARA. NARA says to the Army, "Okay, we're going to have you fill out these little forms here," and the Army said, "Stuff it, we ain't doing it." And so they have forms somewhere. Someone did the forms somewhere, but they're just not. They were never input. And so this is like a big deal, right? So that 320,000 records is actually more. How much more? Don't know.
And that happened with the Secret Service files.
Yes, the Secret Service files are not there. Now, that was just scrongled, right? They had filled out all those things and they couldn't upload any of them.
Right.
Crazy, right? FBI had like 1,500 of these things. Now, if you look on MFF, the Mary Farrell Foundation website, you can see almost all of those FBI files, right? And they all start with the RIF files. So they're filled out, but they're not in the database, the online database, hence not in the Excel files. So this is a gap in the database, but it's not a gap in indexing, right? Those things were indexed. Another point to remember about this database is that it's just the metadata, that it doesn't include all the records. NARA has been putting records online. And the most important thing that I think is going to happen with the collection is that they're going to put all of the records online, but they haven't done it yet. And I think it's going to be years more before they finish. Okay, so now let's just take a look at this, which I think is interesting because people don't really appreciate what's in the database. Remember, this is index content. This doesn't include anything from ARRB or the Warren Commission. Well, it includes little bits from the Warren Commission, but not the major collection of Warren documents. All right. FBI is almost half of all the records. This really surprised me. And the reason for this is that their investigations of all of this stuff are just massive. Plus, HSCA, which is the congressional committee that investigated the King and Kennedy assassinations, was very interested in organized crime conspiracies that might have done in President Kennedy. And so they have an incredible amount of documents relating to LCN, La Cosa Nostra. And there are tens of thousands of pages on this that I've poked through some of it, and there's not a thing there on the assassination that I can find. It's if you want to know mafia history, this is a gold mine. But for those who are interested in the Kennedy assassination, it's you can cut that big slice there like in half.
Right.
It's really a small thing. Then the next largest set is CIA, about a quarter of the records. This is what I've mostly been working on. I've mostly been working on the CIA stuff. Why? Technical reasons. It's easier a lot of the stuff is actually online on the MFF website. Then there's the HSCA stuff, about 20%. And this is very hard to get a grip on because the RIF sheets were filled out by people who were very careless. And there's all kinds of ridiculous mistakes in it. A lot of them are just not filled out at all. What is it? There's the RIF sheet. What does it say? It says more paper. So not helpful, right? And then everything else is less than 10%. So it's really surprising, right? Secret Service, State Department, Army, Department of Justice, right? Outside the FBI. Well, all added up together is less than 10% of the collection. Okay, so that's that.
How does the how much of the unindexed compares to indexed, like in terms of number of documents?
It's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. The NARA gives an estimate of 5 million pages. Okay, 5 million pages. That actually includes, I think that the index material might be somewhere over 3 million pages.
Okay.
So that there's a good chunk of it that is not indexed. There's another very interesting set of unindexed documents, which are donated records. And the one set of records that I'm interested in, getting some sort of grip on, is the 28 boxes that J. Lee Rankin, the general counsel of the Warren Commission, took home with him.
Right.
And, his son, he died, his son donated all of the boxes to NARA. And so they're sitting there. Has anyone done a folder list of those boxes? Apparently not. So, that's a big task. Is there interesting material in there? I'll bet. Another thing that's not indexed, but is available online, is what are called the Warren Commission key person files. And there are 60,000 pages of those that have now been posted at Mary Farrell Foundation. And those are of course extremely relevant, right? There was supposedly the Warren Commission documents. There were 500,000 pages in those, and so on and so forth, right? So it's a ton of stuff.
Yeah,
okay,
so there's also the Garrison material and all
Yeah,
Clay Shot papers. That's all
right.
indexed, and there was some really important stuff there.
Right. Yeah. New Orleans stuff. There's a ton of stuff that was donated and is not, there's not even box lists. So you know more about that than I do.
Well, even if you go to the NARA website where they list like the ARB stuff, they list it by a researcher. But
Right.
at the end of their list, they say there's a plus 105 boxes of material that they haven't gone through yet.
That's a lot of boxes. That's a lot of paper.
Yeah, I mean, what's in there? I mean, who knows?
Well, we'll find out. But, there's no way that we're going to, I've seen estimates for them to finish scanning and posting all this material, including the unindexed material, right? I've seen estimates that they're going to have it out in 2 years, in a year, in 2 years. Oh, it's almost been 2 years already. There's no way they're going to have that in 2 years. 5, maybe.
Yeah.
It's tremendous work. They got to give them money.
I wish they would
give them money to do that.
Be more open with their updates and sort of update us more often for where they stand.
Yeah, this is very frustrating. What are they doing now? They had some updates for Warren Commission documents that are like name lists, okay? And it's like, 800 pages, 1,200 pages. And then it stopped, right? They had done that last year. And now where are they? What are they doing? Are they continuing? I don't get it. Anyway, I'm still buying CIA documents because I don't want to wait 5 years.
Well, good for you. Okay, you can continue.
All right. So here are some numbers, right, for withheld redacted information. Okay. Remember, what do these words mean? Withheld is a technical term. Okay. It means the entire document is not available for public inspection. Okay. And there are 515 such documents. They are all Section 10, Section 11 records. Okay, that is very important to underline. Are there CIA documents that are withheld, i.e., not available for public inspection? No. Are there FBI documents that are not available for public inspection? No. Okay, and so this is where a lot of the problem comes in, a lot of the confusion comes in. Those 515 records are 498 are tax records. They're tax returns filled out by the guys themselves. Whose tax returns? The Oswald family tax return. So it's Marguerite's returns, Robert's returns, Oswald's returns, Oswald and when he was a 16-year-old, when he was a 17-year-old, before he joined the Marines, and then afterwards when he's, doing pathetic odd jobs in Dallas and New Orleans. Then there's the Ruby family. These are really extensive because Ruby, how many people were in Ruby's family? He had like 10 brothers and sisters.
Yeah, quite a few.
And it's got like everyone's tax records. Some of them were made public because they signed releases. And so those can be made public. I think Earl's records are public. But like Eva Grant's records, his older sister, they're not public. She didn't sign the release. Okay, so a bunch of that stuff. Then there are Ruby's lawyers and his roommate. They have tax records. Both of those, one guy, Joe Tonahill, had big tax problems. And so they checked him out thoroughly. The Warren Commission did. And those aren't coming out. Those are withheld. Ruby's roommate, George Senator, had major tax issues and almost went to jail, apparently. And his stuff is withheld. Then, of course, there's Ruth and Michael Payne, who Marina lived with Ruth Payne for several months. And the Warren Commission went out and got all of their tax records, multiple copies of them. And those are withheld. Okay, so that's tax records. Then there are a couple of documents from their interviews, tape recordings, and apparently transcriptions of interviews with Jacqueline Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, done by William Manchester, who wrote a big book about the assassination. And those are withheld, but those are withheld not that's actually a legal issue. They went to court and the court sealed those records. And I don't believe that Congress can open those records, right? Those will stay sealed until 2045, 100 years. And that's that. Okay, so that's everything that's withheld. There's nothing else. Now, there are also records that have tax information in them, but it's not the entire record. And so they cut out the tax information and they release the rest of the record. And there are about 2,000 records like this. So if you add, that total is wrong, obviously, there are about 2,500 records that are either withheld or redacted due to Section 10/11 issues. That's it.
Okay.
Now, let's go on to the Section 5 records, because that's what everyone is writing about. That's what all the discussion is about. Section 5 records are not withheld at all. Okay? They're not withheld. They're redacted. I can't underline this difference enough. What it means is that you get to see the records. Some of them have a lot of blank pages in them, but you get to see how many blank pages there are. You get to see little bits of text here and there on some of the pages, and most of them, it's like the stuff that's redacted, what's redacted? Redacted is nowadays, okay, they've had different ways of redacting. They hold back text. And nowadays they have a blank box, an empty box that they put over the text that is not released, is held back. And so I estimate that there are about 2,800, 2,900 of these records, which have some text in them redacted. And I've divided it into these three sets. One set was released in December 2022. This is all CIA. This is material the CIA is responsible for. Okay, the CIA they look and see who got this information, who acquired this information. That agency is responsible for saying, okay, release it. Okay, right. And the CIA is responsible for most of the material. So here's a set of material the CIA is responsible for releasing, but some of it is like from congressional hearings, because they're interviewing CIA officers in executive hearings. Okay, so that's why it's listed as CIA. In fact, the prefixes of these documents are not all 104. Right? Some of them are 158, which I think is the church committee. And then there's other stuff as well. Okay. So there's that. And back in 2012, 2022, I have trouble saying these years, they released a bunch of stuff. Most of it was released in full, but there are about 1,000 of these records that were released, had text withheld in them, okay, not released, and it just stayed not released. Then there was other material that was not released in 2022, but was released in 2023, and they released like 1,600 more records completely, right? All of the redactions were removed from about 1,600 records, but the last release, which was in June 27, 2023, they released, I need to explain what release means in a minute, 1,100 records, okay? And 1,100 records, those 1,100 records, only about 100 were released in full. That is, there's nothing more redacted in them. The other 1,000 are, or a little less now, I've decided, a little less are, they still have redactions in them, okay? So these are all, this set together, about 1,800, 1,900 records that the CIA is responsible for releasing. I have to tell you, be wary of the word release, okay? Because this is a big issue. Then we have another set, which are owned by 4 other agencies, okay? These 4 other agencies, these records from 4 other agencies include some that have the 104 prefix, i.e. it's a CIA document, but the information in that document came from another agency, and that agency said, don't publish that. So this 950 is there. Now, here's something that also gets neglected. In those 950 records, about 400 of them consist solely of redacted Social Security numbers. And they're not, I am resolutely opposed to releasing the Social Security numbers of people who are not yet deceased. And this means whose Social Security number is in there? Bob Blakey's. Jack Thunheim.
Right.
Why should they have their social security number published?
I'm
And
surprised he hasn't mentioned that. Tonheim hasn't said a word about that.
I you know I could tell you the record number, but I won't. But it is redacted. Okay, it is redacted. There have been cases where they let social security numbers of people who are still alive today, way back when they published these. And I actually wrote to NARA and said, do you know they published so and so's social security number? And I actually got a letter back from Marsha Wagner. She said, my God, where? And so they went back and they re-redacted those, which I think is, it's a little bit, closing the gate after the cows get out, but at least they've made a good faith effort. It's an accident, and they've tried to fix it.
What is the nature of the CIA documents that they've released the last couple of years? How would you describe them? They're not really about the JFK assassination.
It's okay. This is what I want to hop back to one key point. Okay, don't put the PowerPoint up. It doesn't need to be up. Here's the key word is release.
Right.
What does it mean when they say they released the document? It's wrong. They shouldn't say that. It's a source of constant confusion. What they mean is they released redactions, not records. Right. They released redactions in a record. So they released redactions in 1,100 records, right? Some of those records still have other redactions in them. They are not completely open, right? But some of them are. Some of them are open. When they release those redactions, it's not, now we have to come to the question of how much text is in the redactions. Okay, here's an example. There's the CIA record. It's a 201 file, volume 6 of the 201 file for a CIA agent, asset, whatever you want to call him. He's an agent, right? They actually paid this guy, I think, called LI Ring 3. LI Ring 3 has a really long, has a lot of material in his 201 file, which I won't explain what it is, but it's a file they keep on agents, and it's a file they keep on contract employees and a bunch of other people, okay? Just because you have a 201 file doesn't mean you're a CIA agent. That's a big problem. But this guy was, okay? And the file here is 130 pages. There is now one word redacted on page 115 of this file. That's it.
Right.
I've seen worse. I've seen cases where there's a file on JFK Act material. There's like 270 pages, and there is one name redacted on that. Now released. That's now released, right? So one word in 130 pages puts it on that list, right? Right. So when I say 1,800 documents still have redactions, how many of them have one word redacted in hundreds of pages? And the answer is there's more than one, more than one document like that. Okay. Now, that's, of course, an extreme example. Other documents have multiple words on one page, or maybe multiple words or even passages, sentences, even a paragraph omitted throughout the entire document, right? There is a set of documents that have what I call whole page redactions. What are whole page redactions? It means the whole page is gone, right, but they put a blank page in place. And sometimes they even put little boxes on it that tell you things like, page 3. Right. And then the rest is blank, right? How how many pages are withheld like that? Okay, withheld in full. And the answer is probably about 600, which is more than some people. Some people might say that's a lot, but how many pages are there? 5 million. Give me a break.
Right.
So there's a strong tendency. People say, well, there's the whole page is gone. There must be something really important there. We can see they've gone through and released some of these documents earlier that had whole page redactions. Now they've released the pages. What is it? Well, photographs. And so that's, what is it? Why is it the photograph so important? Because it's a picture of some dude in front of the Soviet embassy. You know, they won't let you know it. Not the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, the Soviet embassy in Paris.
Right.
No, don't publish that. Then there's other things that are like forms. 201 files had what's called a personal history statement. And this is about as invasive of personal privacy as imaginable. It has every possible detail they can get of these people. Where were they born? What date were they born? What is their social security number? What is their parents' names? What is their parents' birth date? What is their place of birth? What is their parents' social security numbers? What are your children's names? Where did you go to school? Right? Have you ever been arrested? There's some derogatory material in these things. Someone's father committed suicide after he was discovered to have done some sort of scam. Why should it be released? Eventually it will be, but some of it is withheld.
Right.
For reasons like that.
And so when you look at all the documents in the last 3 or 4 years that have been, is there anything in there really related to the JFK assassination? How much is Cold War stuff and how much is assassination stuff?
Okay, this is a key question. The ARRB released everything they thought was really relevant and important to the JFK assassination by 1998, when they went out of business, when they closed. But they said there's material that's not particularly relevant, but that does have an impact on diplomatic relations and military operations and so on and so forth. And so we'll hold that back for another 25 years. And now they're still holding some of that back. What is some of that material that's held back? Okay, this document is like completely open. There are only 2 numbers, or is it 3 numbers that are covered with a box. What do those numbers represent? They represent the nuclear yield of weapons that can be delivered by American fighters. And those numbers are redacted. And I said, well, 1963, it's a long time ago. Did they review it? Who reviewed it? And it turns out who reviewed it. It's called the Former Redacted Document Group, FRD. And these are the guys that they actually published. The United States has actually published the number of thermonuclear weapons that it holds in its storage. It's a frightening number still. It's like 6,000 or something like that.
Right.
No one else has done that. And the FRD said, yeah, you can do that. And the FRD looked at those yield numbers and said, no, don't do that. And so President Biden, looked at the FRD recommendation and said, okay, we're not going to release that. So that kind of stuff is held back. Now, that's not assassination related, except in the sense that we want to know, okay, how nervous were people and how big was the threat? And so they have a number there that they're not going to tell you. Now, the stuff that I think is important has to do with the investigations. And there's a lot of stuff that they held back. And they held back because of, well, there are many reasons they held it back, but one key reason is what's called liaison relations. And so Mexico City has been a key focus of the JFK assassination investigation and conspiracies because Oswald went there. Why did he go there? And when Oswald was there, he called up the Russian embassy and said, did you get the telegram? I made a request for a visa. My name is Lee Oswald. And that phone was tapped. And so the CIA got that, and that's how the CIA knew that Oswald had been to Mexico City, because he said his name on a tel tap. That's how they knew, right? But how did they know? How did they get the tel tap? And the answer to that question was not released until 2018. And the answer is the president of Mexico approved a joint tel tap operation with the CIA.
Yes, that was one of the big disclosures.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So the State Department in 1998 certified. I mean, the CIA said, oh, God, don't release that. And the State Department wrote a letter to the ARRB saying, our evaluation is that if you release this information, the current ruling party in Mexico, which is the same party that president belonged to, will fall from power. So don't do that. And so the ARRB said, oh, well, okay.
Right.
And that's a very, I mean, the CIA liaison relationships with the Mexican government there's nothing more sensitive. Well, there are other liaison relations that are also sensitive. They're all sensitive.
Was there a separate camera set up with the Mexicans that were separate from the CIA camera?
We don't know. I mean, the Mexican government sent a set of documents to the CIA. It's called Special Intelligence, and there are about 30 pages that are redacted in there. So there's a lot of information that's withheld. But the information that is in there, it's all in Spanish, so I disclaim any expertise. Some of it is like the bus passenger lists where they found Oswald's name. It's material like that. The ARRB asked the Mexican government, did you keep a copy of the tape recording? And the Mexican government says, we don't have any of that stuff. None of that stuff. So there's that. Gus Russo said that he had seen other Mexican intelligence service info on Oswald, and he posted a thing on
Dale Meyer's website.
Yeah, on Dale Meyer's website. Well, I have not had time to look at this. This is not, in any case, this is not in the collection. This is material outside the collection, the ARC.
And of course, there's a lot of material outside the collection in Minsk, in Moscow, and in Havana.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff in there still, but the main stuff that's held back now, so Mexico liaison material is often just the name, and sometimes just the word liaison, right? Because the telegram is from Brussels, okay? And so liaison here says, now they've told you that they have a liaison relation with Brussels. Now, Jeff Morley and a bunch of people have said, well, this is why did they withhold it? This is errant nonsense. And the answer is, no, it's not. The Belgians don't like it.
Right, right.
It's not a simple statement that we cooperate with the Belgian intelligence service. It's not that. It's that on November 22nd, we called up the Belgian guy, our Belgian guy, and he said, "Don't know that guy." Very specific as to time, place, and even person, or records. So the Helsinki was withheld everywhere. It was finally released in 2022. Interestingly, Finland also released its file on Oswald that was released, right?
Right, right.
And that, it was released because the CIA had been begging them for a decade, can we please release the name Helsinki in our cables to you? And they said, don't do that. Don't do that. I think one reason that stuff does change, right? Is it the case that Finland is now a member of NATO? If so, this might explain why they now feel free to release some of this information. The Swedes have released Stockholm.
Right.
The Norwegians have released Oslo. These were place names that are withheld. And so those documents had redactions. Cables to and from those places had redactions for decades. And they were only released year before last.
Were there a lot of church committee documents that sort of the ARB sort of left to the end? Or a lot of other documents they left to the end?
The church committee documents, there was a big hassle with them, and it was some of them they couldn't find, and then they found some of them, and there were lots of issues with those documents. Those documents were held by Congress, and so I know that a guy named Malcolm Blunt very interested in this material, and there seem to be lots of these documents that are cited in interviews that are not in the collection. And so he wrote a very snippy letter to the NARA, and NARA, had a guy named James Matheson that did some real legwork on that and said, well, some of this stuff, typos. They're citing records, but they cite them wrong. And it's probably this record, or that record, which is in the collection.
Ah, I see.
And the other stuff is, don't know what that's all about, right? Church committee records, there's another issue with them. It's not just church committee, it's HSCA interviews, right? HSCA interviews had some very important stuff, some very interesting stuff. And there's a lot of confusion about these. Apparently there was like duplicate records that, some stuff was released in this copy and not that copy. And some of this stuff, another key issue that they've been releasing is JM Wave material. JM Wave is the Miami station, the CIA Miami station, which they used to be. First, it was Caribbean Sea countries. And after during the when they were running it in the run up to the Bay of Pigs, they set it up to be, specifically Cuban. And then when JFK's war against Cuba and Project Mongoose and all this stuff, they were totally focused on Cuba. And they had hundreds of people, thousands of Cubans, dozens of front companies. And a lot of that information was redacted. And it's now coming loose because I think some of it, the Cubans are there still. They're still in Cuba. Their families are there.
Right.
They don't want to release that. So other stuff is that it was, part of their plots and scheming against the Cuban intelligence services, the DGI or whatever it's called now. And, they don't want to tell them that guy was, our agent. One case that struck me is that I believe it was the Cuban ambassador to Spain was a CIA informant. Oh, that came late. That was 2022, I think.
Have you been, when the last time I visited the archives, I mean, thanks to you, I wanted to get some Secret Service records. And, when you go to the archives, you fill out these forms, and then they go to a database to try and find out where the material is. And of course, those Secret Service records are not in that database.
Right.
And so fortunately, you had pointed me to a Mary Farrell file, which had some RIF numbers. But so I asked for the Raymond Brochure's Secret Service file. And of course, I knew they wouldn't find it in the database. They couldn't find it. And this woman just gave up, and she called a friend, and he came over, and he spent around 15 minutes going through all these paperwork, the binders on the shelves, looking for the location of these files. Finally, he found it.
Right.
And I actually got those files for Raymond Brochure's, which was really quite interesting. But it's a battle sometimes there to find some of this material. Are they going to, do you know where they stand in terms of a new tool or new finding aid that will replace those spreadsheets?
They're going to have to, they're going to put all those, they're going to scan all those records and put them online. When they do that, they will have to put those records in the database, in the JFK database. Okay, so they will have to fill out those forms. This is big time work, right? And so I believe from what I read that they actually said this. They said, when we're scanning them, then we'll finish filling out the database. Oh, yeah.
And do you know, like, why when NARA releases some of these documents, they're not PDF searchable, whereas Mary Farrell will make them PDF searchable.
I think their attitude is it's, we gave you the documents, do what you want with them. Right. Some of it is crazy. I think I had an email exchange with Paul Hoke on some of the recently scanned Warren Commission material, and he was kind of irked by the way they handled it because they didn't even have JPEGs. They had TIFF files.
Right. They're really large files.
But the JPEG is compressed. TIFF is not compressed. So TIFF is like, if a JPEG is like 1 meg, 1 M, then the TIFF file is probably, 40.
Right, yeah. And they also give you both sides of the sheet, even if the other side is blank.
Well, they've been hounded about this mercilessly by people like John Newman, who said they're hiding something. They didn't give you the other side. And so this is an issue, right? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. If you didn't scan all of the back sides, how do we know?
Right. Good point. Do you have any comments on the Mary Farrell lawsuit?
I support. Let me make my attitude crystal clear, because the people have said things that it's not so. I 100% support the JFK Act, which calls for release of everything, except for the Section 10 and 11 files. I would actually like to see the tax returns released as well. Are they going to withhold them forever? How about 100 years? When it's been 100 years, when these people are 100 years old, can they release them then? Not yet, not according to the law. As far as I can tell, the tax code, the U.S. tax code, provides for permanent withholding of tax records. It's not even like the census, which they release after, 50 years, something like that. So I think that they should make an exception for those tax records. That would require them to amend the JFK Act, and I'm in favor of amending it. They're going to release the Social Security numbers. I support that, but they should be released after those guys are dead.
Right.
That's the only rational way of doing it. Everything else is punitive. Why am I being punished for being general counsel of the House Select Committee on Assassinations? It's not right. So I support the JFK Act. And Mary Farrell is an attempt, the lawsuit is an attempt to get, part of it was an attempt to get at the records. And I support release of the records. There were other parts of the lawsuit which were different. And so, I mean, it's just another legal case, and the judge says what the judge says. If the law can be interpreted that way, then do it. And if not, then you don't do it. So I think that they argued that Biden or NARA or whoever didn't have the authority to withhold the nuclear yields of, the weapons that the U.S. was flying on its planes. And clearly this is wrong. He does have the authority. That's why the act was written the way it was written, so that he can withhold stuff like that. They were very aware, Congress was very aware when the act was passed, that they don't know everything that's in there. And so just to be safe, the president gets to review it. And if there's something in there that, well, that's a mistake, you don't have them release it. So, so there's that. The Mary Farrell suit also had this thing where they wanted to they wanted NARA to become a sort of super ARRB. ARRB is gone, right? In fact, Judge Thunheim is the only member of the ARRB still with us. The other four board members have passed away.
Yeah.
And so they said, well, that we should still provide some. The suit said that they didn't complete the act, so NARA has to act as the ARRB. And the judge said, not. So, so that's settled. I mean, I have no opinion one way or another about it. If he says do it, then they'll do it. But it was clear to me, actually, that the law doesn't say that, and NARA can't do it, right? They can't do it because they don't have the powers that were vested in the ARRB.
Right. I get, going to the archives for over all these years, I'll tell you, they've lost some things. I mean, I'll give you an example. The Perry Russo's tape recordings of when he was hypnotized by Jim Garrison. They had the tape recordings of those hypnosis sessions. They're listed in the inventory of materials that Harry Connick gave to the ARB. Now, fortunately, when I visited Hugh Ainsworth, he actually had a CD-ROM of one of the hypnosis sessions, which I've since put up on YouTube. So he had one, but when I went to NARA for the other one, they can't find it.
Well, I think that some of those will turn up.
I hope so.
There was a series of, now note that was unindexed material.
Yep.
So that's probably part of the problem. But another problem is that in some cases they can't find the documents. They have the riff sheet. They have a riff sheet, but they can't find the document that matches the riff sheet. And this is a big hassle, and they've spent big big time resources on this. And they came up with some reasons. One reason is that, okay, this is what's called NBR material. NBR means not believed relevant.
Right.
And so FBI had a bunch of this stuff. And because it's NBR, NARA said, well, you're supposed to put it over here. And the FBI said, no, we're going to keep it over there. We're going to keep it in our place, because in Alexandria, in Virginia, in our archive in Virginia, Alexandria, Virginia, because, it's safer there. And then when it's time, when 2017 rolls around and we're going to release all of this NBR stuff, then we'll give it to you. And like 2 years before then, in 2015, the Alexandria, Virginia archive was flooded.
Oh.
And like freaking deluge. And so they had to apply for emergency permission to destroy the paper, which was becoming a health threat. and so they lost 20 files in that, and those 20 files were extensive. Some of those they had copies of, some of those they did not.
I mean, one file, I was checking the one of the HSC records for the Secret Service agents who worked on Kennedy's detail in Chicago and were asked about a potential Chicago plot. And one file I got, I took out the file, and there's like at least 1 or 2 pages missing from the file. And I sent NARA an email, and they said, well, that's it. If it's missing, it's missing.
Right. And CIA records are full of this. CIA records are full of this. But if you poke around, you have to, people don't understand how massive the duplication is in these records. It is massive. So CIA records that are indexed, I've checked them, 85,000 plus or minus, right? 85,000. Every one of those is duplicated. All of them. There might be one that's not duplicated, or 1 or 2 that, a handful that are not duplicated, but some of them, there's a cable from CIA headquarters to Mexico City. And this has been a super controversial cable. And so in the collection, there are no fewer than, I think, 65 copies of this one cable. It's just everywhere, right? And so there was like one name redacted on it. What name was redacted? There are multiple versions of this cable. There's the version that was the headquarters copy of the cable, and there's the copy that Mexico City received. The Mexico City copy has routing and record and routing sheet that people were signing their names to and scribbling comments on. And so on that sheet, they had the names of Herb and Barb Manel. And their names were exempted from release by the ARRB until 2018. Which is another case where you could certainly make an argument that those names those are relevant, right? Those are key personnel in the CIA station in Mexico City who handled the investigation into Oswald's visit. And so that kind of stuff is, what can I say? They said, all you need to know is that they handled it and how they handled it. You don't have to know who handled it. And they, some of these people were very emotional about this. John Whitten wrote letters that are just very, heart-wrenching to read. I mean, he said that they'll kick me out of the country. I'm a cripple. I have no health care in the United States. Where will I go? My wife has divorced me. What can I do? They might even put me in jail because I lied on my, entrance application. Please don't do this. And so the ARB said, well, okay. And then guess what? His name was released in 1996. No, not in 2000. His name was released, in 1994.
And I've actually seen some of those documents with his letters.
Yeah.
Quite astounding. Look, we're running out of time, so before we go, an open-ended question. First off, could you say a bit about zombie redactions? But number two, what are your expectations over the next couple of years for potential releases from NARA, if any?
The zombie redactions is just kind of my idea of a joke. And basically what it is it's inconsistent redacting. So they redact the name in document A, and they release the name in document B, which is an exact copy of document A. So there are two copies of this document. One they release the name, one they don't. So, people see, and so it's released, right? And so it's posted on the NARA website, and people release it and say, "Oh, they've released this name that was hidden for decades." And the answer is, no, that name was released in 1994.
Right.
But
I blogged about some of those.
They had
As of you.
You found some great ones there, right? Go all the way back.
You've got to check every version of a document.
Right. You have to look at every version. You have to look at every version of the document, and that takes time, right? And so that's that. And they killed most of the zombies. They've driven stake through the zombie hearts for most of them, but I'll bet there's at least a half dozen still left.
Right.
And so, that's that. Now, for the forthcoming releases, I have to say that CIA is going to take their sweet time reviewing the documents again. I mean, they spent an amazing amount of time going over this stuff. And I think that they actually said in their letter to the NSC, which was their official response to Biden's memo saying, get moving. And so they wrote a letter, and the letter said, we're gonna do this again in 2 or 3 years. So that's that. The FBI has engaged to review the names of people that are being withheld to see if they've died every year. So the FBI will be moving more forthcoming on that. Other stuff, it will be longer. NSA is, the Department of Defense response to this thing was that we'll release this information when it's no longer a question of military security, defense information. And so for the nuclear yield, they say basically when we're not using nuclear weapons anymore. Right. And so that's going to be a while. NSA gets some of its signal intelligence from other partners. And they had what was called the UK-USA agreement. And Australia was a signatory to that as well. Canada is a signatory to that. And so, they get some of their signal intelligence from UK, Canada, and Australia. And they're not going to release that until those guys say, okay, we don't care anymore. Like Helsinki did.
Right.
Finland did. And that could be a while. Now,
it could be a while, because I know in Canada we have a lot of secrecy in Canada. A lot of documents on all sorts of things are secret.
I was trying to find information on John Grossi, who was a co-worker of Lee Oswald, and a crazy guy. And he was arrested twice in Canada and spent jail time both times. And I wanted to find out, exactly when, how, and why, and where he was arrested. He robbed a bank.
Right.
And then the first time, and then they thought he was going to rob another bank the second time. And no, can't get any of those records. no. Canadians believe in privacy.
We sure do. Let me tell you, that could be a subject of a whole new interview. Look, thank you very much for being on this premiere show of On the Trail of Delusion. Robert, you are
Pleasure.
a real treat and an incredible asset to the JFK community. So thank you very much. And
Pleasure.
in the notes, we'll put the website for people to check out your blog, which is essential reading on the files. So thank you very much. And please tune in next week for another edition of On the Trail of Delusion.